The morning sun was barely peeking through the tall buildings when the firehouse came to life. The sound of clanging metal, footsteps on the polished floors, and the low hum of the engines filled the air. Firefighters moved with purpose, each knowing their role in the chaos that could strike at any moment. Among them was a man who had been with the team for several years. He was known for his calm presence and steady hands, the kind of person everyone relied on when the fire raged too high or the smoke became too thick. He walked through the firehouse, nodding at colleagues who were checking equipment or cleaning gear. The air smelled of smoke residue, cleaning solution, and a hint of coffee from the kitchen. This smell had become familiar, almost comforting despite its association with danger and risk. He reached the locker room and began preparing for the day, checking his uniform and gear with meticulous care. Every buckle, strap, and zipper had to be perfect. A mistake here could cost lives. The team gathered in the main room for the morning briefing. Their captain, a veteran firefighter with years of experience, laid out the day's schedule and reminded everyone of safety protocols. But beneath the usual instructions, there was an unspoken understanding among the team. Each of them knew that at any moment they could be called to fight a blaze, to enter a building that was collapsing, to face situations where seconds meant life or death. They were bonded not just by profession, but by trust that only grows in the face of danger. Among the group was a teammate who had been with him almost as long. They had saved each other from near disasters before, sharing silent gestures and quick words that conveyed more than any speech could. Their friendship was quiet but profound, built on countless emergencies and shared experiences that few outside the firehouse could understand. This teammate had a calm bravery, the kind that inspired others without needing recognition. As they suited up, the radio crackled with a call that made every heart race. An apartment building on the other side of town was engulfed in flames. Residents were trapped on upper floors and the fire was spreading quickly. The team's training kicked in instantly. The protagonist and his teammate exchanged a brief glance, a nod that said without words, "Let's go. We've got this." The ride to the fire was tense. The streets blurred past, sirens wailing and lights flashing. Even in the brief silence between the shouts and engine roars, there was a sense of focus, a quiet understanding that once they arrived, the world would narrow down to smoke, heat, and the people in danger. He thought of his family for a moment and then pushed the thought aside. There was no time for fear, only action. Arriving at the scene, the sight took his breath away. Flames licked the sides of the building, black smoke billowed into the sky, and the smell of burning materials stung his nose. Residents were screaming from windows, waving for help. The fire seemed alive, moving unpredictably, threatening to consume everything in its path. Despite the chaos, the firefighters worked methodically, laying hoses, coordinating with one another, and preparing to enter the building. The protagonist and his teammate were assigned to rescue a family trapped on the top floors. They moved together, communicating with hand signals and brief phrases, the kind of teamwork that comes from years of trust. Inside, the heat was intense and the smoke made it hard to breathe. Every step was careful, every action measured. They guided the family down the stairs, shielding them from falling debris and hot surfaces. The children clung to the protagonist, their small hands trembling in his. As they reached the halfway point, a sudden explosion rocked the building. The floor beneath them cracked and gave way in places. Dust filled the air and the roar of the fire was deafening. In a heartbeat, his teammate pushed him out of the direct path of falling debris, taking the brunt of the explosion himself. The protagonist hit the ground hard, coughing and disoriented but alive. He turned to see his teammate struggling under the rubble. The sight made his stomach twist. Instinctively, he ran back, trying to pull him free, but the heat and flames forced him to retreat. Other firefighters arrived to help, but the damage had been done. His teammate was badly injured and later did not survive the ordeal. Emerging from the building, the protagonist felt numb. He had saved the family, had acted heroically, but the price was too high. The community praised him, calling him a hero, but he could not shake the image of his fallen friend. The cheers felt hollow. Every life saved was a reminder of the one lost. He walked among the crowd, listening to their gratitude, but inside he felt only grief and guilt. Back at the firehouse, the atmosphere was somber. Colleagues spoke in low tones, some comforting him, others lost in their own reflection of the tragedy. The protagonist could not eat, could not sleep. He replayed the incident over and over, analyzing every choice, every step, wondering if he could have done more, if he could have somehow saved his teammate as well. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of guilt did not ease. He visited the family of his fallen friend, offering condolences and support. They were kind, grateful even, but seeing their sorrow mirrored his own. The home was quiet, filled with memories and photographs of a life that ended too soon. He realized that no words could undo the sacrifice and no action could bring back what was lost. He avoided the firehouse for a time, unable to face the places and faces that reminded him of the tragedy. The routine he had loved, the sense of purpose and camaraderie, now felt distant and painful. The medals, the articles in the local news, the praise from strangers, all of it was meaningless. He felt he did not deserve to be called a hero when someone else had given everything. In the quiet moments, he remembered the small things about his teammate, the way he laughed, the quiet reassurance he offered during tense calls, the gestures that spoke volumes. These memories were bittersweet, comforting, yet painful. They reminded him of the bond they shared, a bond that death could not sever, but also of the void left behind. Despite the grief, there was a small spark inside him that refused to go out. He began to understand that survival came with responsibility, that the courage and spirit of his teammate could live on through his actions. The first steps were small: visiting the firehouse, helping with minor tasks, reconnecting with colleagues. Each step was a struggle, but it was a step toward facing the pain rather than running from it. The morning light continued to filter through the windows of the firehouse, just as it had on that day. The smell of smoke and coffee remained, comforting in its familiarity. Life continued, despite tragedy, despite loss, and somewhere deep inside he knew that honoring his teammate would mean living fully, facing the world with courage, and carrying forward the legacy of sacrifice and heroism that had been entrusted to him. The story of that day, the bond between friends and the life saved at the cost of another, began to shape him in ways he could not yet fully understand. It was the beginning of a journey, not just of heroism but of learning to forgive himself, to carry the memory of his teammate with pride and not just with guilt. The flames of that morning would never be forgotten, but neither would the lessons of courage, loyalty, and love that had been forged in the heat of danger. The morning after the fire, the protagonist returned to the scene with a heavy heart. The building, now blackened and charred, stood as a silent witness to the chaos that had unfolded. The smell of smoke lingered, sharp and acrid, mixing with the faint odor of melted plastic and scorched wood. Emergency crews were still on site, checking for lingering hazards, documenting the damage, and offering support to the displaced residents. He walked slowly among the debris, memories of the previous day flooding his mind. Every broken window, every blackened wall reminded him of the moment his teammate had sacrificed himself. The memory of that split-second decision, the push that saved his life, haunted him. He could still feel the heat of the flames and the blast of the explosion. The gratitude from the rescued family clashed painfully with the image of his friend trapped under rubble. It was impossible to reconcile the two, and it made his chest ache. His colleagues tried to reach out, but he could barely meet their eyes. He felt unworthy of their support, unworthy of the label hero. The team understood, giving him space, yet their quiet presence was a reminder of the bond he had with the man who was gone. Each firefighter had faced danger. Each had risked their life, but none had felt the sharp edge of loss the way he did now. It was a loneliness that he had never known. Back at the firehouse, the atmosphere was somber. The walls that usually echoed with laughter and conversation were quiet. The clanging of metal and the hum of machinery seemed distant and muted. The radio, usually alive with alerts and updates, felt like an intrusion into his grief. He moved mechanically, performing his duties, checking equipment and helping with minor tasks, but it all felt hollow. Every action was accompanied by the gnawing question, could he have done more? He remembered his teammates' words from years ago. We're only as strong as the person beside us. Watch out for each other always. Those words had been a promise, and now he felt that promise had been broken. He had survived, yes, but at the cost of someone he trusted more than anyone. The weight of guilt was crushing, a constant reminder of the sacrifice that had been made. He questioned why he had lived while his friend had not, why fate had singled him out to carry on while leaving someone else behind. Days turned into weeks, and the protagonist struggled to find meaning in the routine of life. He avoided social gatherings, declined interviews, and withdrew from the support of colleagues. Sleep became elusive, and when he did sleep, it was filled with dreams of smoke, flames, and the moment his friend had fallen. Each awakening was accompanied by a sense of emptiness, a feeling that he was walking through life with a shadow hanging over him. The community, meanwhile, continued to hail him as a hero. Local newspapers ran stories about his bravery. Television crews wanted interviews, and neighbors expressed gratitude for the lives he had saved. But the praise felt unbearable. Every smile directed at him, every handshake was a reminder of the life that had been lost. He wondered if people understood that heroism sometimes came with an unbearable cost, a cost he carried every moment of every day. He began to spend more time alone, walking through quiet streets or sitting in empty parks. He watched people going about their daily lives and wondered if they could understand what it was like to face death and lose someone you cared about in a single moment. He thought about the family that had been rescued, the children clutching his hands, their eyes wide with fear and relief. He remembered the sound of their voices, their whispered thank yous, and the tears of gratitude. And yet, amidst those memories, his grief for his fallen friend never subsided. One evening, he found himself visiting the local hospital, standing outside the room where his teammate had been treated. The memory of the team's frantic efforts, the paramedics working tirelessly to stabilize him, and the quiet, courageous way his friend had faced death all came rushing back. He stood there in silence, remembering the way his teammate had smiled through pain, had reassured him with a hand on his shoulder, had reminded him that they were a team. That memory was both comforting and unbearable, a paradox of love and loss. In the days that followed, he began to write letters he never intended to send. They were addressed to his friend, full of regrets, memories, and things left unsaid. He wrote about the moments they had shared, the small jokes, the quiet conversations over coffee at the firehouse, the way they had watched out for each other in dangerous situations. Each letter was a catharsis, a way to release some of the pain he carried, though it did not lessen the guilt. The act of writing allowed him to confront his feelings instead of burying them, though the emptiness remained. He started returning to the firehouse slowly, initially for brief visits, staying in the corners and avoiding the main group. Over time, he helped check and maintain equipment, ensuring everything was ready for the next emergency. He realized that staying away entirely would not honor his teammates' memory. The work they loved, the sense of purpose, the camaraderie, all of it was part of what his friend had valued most. By neglecting it, he felt he was dishonoring the very essence of the man who had given his life to save others. One night, after a long day, he found himself sitting alone on the firehouse steps. The sky was dark, but the city lights reflected off the nearby buildings, casting a warm glow. He thought of his teammate, imagining him standing beside him, offering reassurance, maybe even scolding him for dwelling so much on guilt. In that quiet moment, he realized that the act of heroism was not just in saving lives in the fire, but in carrying forward the spirit and lessons of those who had sacrificed. The next call came unexpectedly. A minor fire in a residential building, nothing like the inferno he had faced before. But it reminded him that life moved forward, that people still depended on the firefighter's courage. He suited up with deliberate care, feeling the familiar weight of his gear on his shoulders. As he moved, he noticed the small gestures he had once overlooked, the reassuring nod of a colleague, the coordination of his team, the precise handling of equipment. Each of these was a thread in the fabric of the brotherhood that bound them together. During the call, he felt the presence of his fallen friend, not as a shadow of guilt, but as a guide. Every decision he made, every action he took, he imagined the approval and trust of the teammate who had always stood beside him. This was a new form of courage, one that required facing grief rather than avoiding it. He realized that moving forward did not mean forgetting, and honoring his friend did not mean carrying only pain. It meant using the lessons learned, the bonds shared, and the memory of sacrifice to act with strength and integrity. Over the following weeks, he began small acts of tribute. He repaired and maintained gear with extra care, checked on younger firefighters, and shared stories of courage, including the sacrifices made by those who had come before. These acts were quiet, personal, but they slowly helped him reconcile his grief. Each action was a step toward forgiveness, a small acknowledgement that heroism is not only in dramatic rescues, but also in living with honor and responsibility. The community's recognition continued, but it no longer felt heavy. He accepted gratitude with a quiet nod, allowing himself to feel some pride while remembering the price of survival. Each life saved was a reminder of why he had chosen this path, and each memory of his teammate was a reminder of the bravery that inspired him. He understood that guilt would not vanish overnight, but it could be transformed into purpose, into honoring a life that had made an extraordinary impact. As the days turned into months, he slowly emerged from the shadow of grief. He began participating in training exercises, helping to guide new recruits and sharing lessons that were as much about life and loss as they were about firefighting techniques. Through teaching, he found healing. The memory of his friend became a source of strength rather than a weight that crushed him. Each story told, each lesson passed on, ensured that the sacrifice was never forgotten and that the spirit of heroism lived on. He realized that life was fragile, that heroism was intertwined with loss, and that surviving meant carrying the torch forward. The friendship that had been severed by tragedy continued to influence his decisions, his courage, and his compassion. In every emergency, every rescue, and every quiet moment of reflection, he honored the memory of the man who had saved him, ensuring that sacrifice was never in vain. The journey through grief was ongoing, but with each step, he embraced the lesson that heroism is not measured solely in dramatic acts, but in how one continues to live with purpose, integrity, and love. The weeks following the tragedy were some of the hardest in the protagonist's life. Each morning felt like a battle with himself, forcing him out of bed to face a world that seemed indifferent to his pain. The firehouse, once a place of camaraderie and purpose, now reminded him of what he had lost. He walked through its familiar halls with a hollow feeling, hearing the echoes of laughter that no longer reached his heart. The absence of his teammate was felt in every corner, every tool, and every piece of gear. It was as though the firehouse itself mourned with him. He spent long hours alone, wandering through quiet streets or sitting in parks where no one knew him. The stillness allowed him to think, to remember, and to confront emotions that he had previously buried under the weight of duty. He replayed the moments of that day again and again, the heat, the flames, the smoke choking the stairwell, the terrified family in his arms, and then the explosion. The memory of his teammate pushing him out of the path of falling debris was vivid, and the thought that he had survived while his friend had not tormented him. Every night, sleep became more elusive. When he closed his eyes, he saw the same images: flames licking the walls, smoke filling the hallways, the terrified faces of children, and the final moments of his teammate. He woke up in cold sweats, heart racing, unable to shake the feeling that he had betrayed the one person who had always been by his side. Guilt consumed him, making every small success feel insignificant and every kind word from colleagues feel undeserved. The community continued to praise him for saving lives, but their admiration felt hollow. He could not forget that someone else had paid the ultimate price. Every handshake, every smile, and every newspaper article reminded him that he was alive only because of his friend's sacrifice. Even well-meaning congratulations caused a pang of pain, a silent reminder that he could not escape the past. He began to distance himself from everyone, even his closest colleagues. He avoided group meals, stayed late cleaning equipment, and volunteered for solitary tasks. While others sought his presence for advice or reassurance, he found comfort in isolation. The firehouse became both a refuge and a prison, a place where he could face his memories, but also a place that constantly reminded him of his loss. One afternoon, he walked to the grave of his fallen teammate. The cemetery was quiet, the sun casting long shadows across the ground. He knelt beside the headstone, tracing the engraved letters with his fingers. He spoke aloud, even though no one could hear him, confessing feelings he could not share anywhere else. He apologized for surviving, for not being able to save him, for the hollow victories he had claimed. He spoke of their shared experiences, of the jokes and quiet conversations that had strengthened their bond, of the courage that he admired so deeply. Tears flowed freely, unrestrained, washing away the walls he had built around his emotions. He left the cemetery with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of determination. Though the pain would never fully disappear, he realized that he could not let it define him. His teammates' memory demanded more than sorrow. It demanded action, courage, and the continuation of the life they had both chosen as firefighters. He began to see that his role was not only to save lives, but also to honor the spirit of the man who had given everything. Returning to the firehouse, he started small. He helped organize equipment, checked safety protocols, and offered guidance to new recruits. His words were measured, his actions precise, but there was a noticeable shift. He was slowly transforming his guilt into purpose. Each day he found ways to honor his teammates' memory through dedication, by carrying forward the values they had shared: courage, loyalty, and compassion. Training exercises became more than just preparation for emergencies. They were a chance to test himself, to build resilience, and to remind the younger firefighters that courage was not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. He told stories of bravery and sacrifice, carefully highlighting the lessons without glorifying tragedy. He spoke of teamwork, of watching out for each other, and of the importance of trust in life or death situations. These stories were also a way to cope, a way to process grief, and a way to share the enduring spirit of his lost friend. One night, he found himself reviewing old photographs of the team, including the moments before the fire. They were smiling, laughing, full of life and energy. Among the images was one of his teammate, eyes bright and confident, a smile that seemed to say, "We've got this." He stared at it for a long time, feeling the weight of absence but also a spark of inspiration. That spark grew into a resolve to live fully, to act courageously, and to honor the legacy left behind. He began to mentor younger firefighters more intentionally, sharing not just techniques but also lessons about resilience, compassion, and teamwork. He spoke about the importance of preparation and vigilance, but also about the human side of the job: the fear, the adrenaline, the grief, and the joy of saving lives. He taught them to respect the dangers they faced while also embracing the courage that allowed them to face those dangers head-on. His relationship with the firehouse team gradually healed. Colleagues noticed the change, the quiet determination that replaced despair. They respected his honesty about grief and admired his commitment to passing on the values that had made their team strong. Slowly, he reconnected with friendships that had frayed under the weight of guilt. Conversations returned, laughter began to seep back into the halls, and a sense of camaraderie grew once more, tempered by the memory of loss but strengthened by shared purpose. Despite these small victories, the guilt never fully left him. There were moments when it returned, uninvited during quiet nights or after particularly dangerous calls, but he learned to acknowledge it, to let it remind him of the responsibility he carried and then to channel it into action. He understood that surviving a tragedy did not erase the pain. It offered an opportunity to live with greater awareness, to act with integrity, and to honor those who had been lost. The community also began to notice his transformation. While they still called him a hero, he no longer felt the weight of undeserved praise. He accepted recognition with humility, using it as a platform to educate others about the courage, sacrifice, and teamwork that firefighting required. He shared stories that highlighted the humanity behind the heroism, focusing on lessons rather than accolades. Through this, he began to heal in a public, meaningful way, bridging the gap between personal grief and communal respect. He also began to reach out to the families of those rescued, ensuring they were safe, supported, and cared for. He understood the fragility of life and the responsibility that came with being a first responder. Each visit, each word of reassurance, each act of kindness helped him process the grief he carried and offered comfort to those who had been directly affected by the fire. One particularly quiet evening, he returned home after a long shift. The weight of the day pressed on him, but he felt a subtle shift inside. He sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker, and felt the presence of his teammate in the small acts of courage and care he had performed. It was not a presence of guilt or sadness, but a quiet guiding force, a reminder of what had been sacrificed and why it mattered. He understood that moving forward was not forgetting. It was living with honor and purpose. He began to carry a small personal item that had belonged to his teammate, a keepsake that reminded him of their bond and of the sacrifice made. This item, though simple, became a symbol of courage and continuity, a tangible connection to a life that had left an indelible mark. Every time he felt overwhelmed, he touched it, drew strength from it, and renewed his commitment to live fully and bravely. Over time, he embraced the duality of heroism and loss. He realized that grief could coexist with action, that memory could inspire rather than paralyze, and that surviving meant carrying forward the courage and values of those who had sacrificed. The journey was ongoing, and he knew there would be difficult moments, but he also knew that his life, lived with purpose, would honor the memory of his teammate in ways that transcended the pain. Through mentoring, action, and quiet reflection, he transformed his grief into a source of strength. The firehouse once again became a place of shared purpose and camaraderie, filled with laughter, stories, and dedication. The memory of his friend remained present, a guiding force in every rescue, every lesson, and every act of courage. And in that presence, he found not only healing but a renewed understanding of what it truly meant to be a hero, to face fear, to act with integrity, and to carry forward the legacy of those who gave everything so that others could live. Months had passed since the fire, and the protagonist had slowly begun to rebuild his life, though the shadow of loss was always nearby. Each day brought new challenges and opportunities to honor the memory of his fallen teammate, and yet the grief remained a quiet presence in the background. It was during one of these ordinary days that something unexpected arrived at the firehouse, something that would begin to shift the heavy weight he had been carrying. A package had been delivered, wrapped simply in brown paper, with a note addressed to him in a familiar handwriting. He hesitated before opening it, unsure if he wanted to face whatever lay inside. The handwriting belonged to the family of his fallen teammate. With trembling hands, he tore the paper and unfolded the note. The words were warm, personal, and full of gratitude. They spoke not only of thanks for the lives he had saved, but also of the courage and loyalty that his teammate had always admired in him. The letter was a reminder that his friend had believed in him, even in the moments when he struggled to believe in himself. Inside the package was a small, meaningful item, a firefighter's charm necklace that had belonged to his teammate. The charm was simple, a symbol of protection and courage, and yet it carried a profound weight. As he held it, memories of their shared experiences came flooding back. He remembered the laughter, the long shifts, the small gestures of support, and the silent reassurances in moments of danger. It was as if a piece of his friend had returned to him, offering guidance and comfort from beyond the pain. He felt a lump in his throat as he read the letter again and again. The family wrote that they wanted him to have it, to remember that he had carried out his duties with bravery and to remind him that he was not alone. They understood his grief and wanted him to know that surviving the tragedy did not make him responsible for the loss. Their words were a balm to his wounded heart, a gentle nudge toward healing that he had not known he needed. The protagonist clasped the charm in his hands, feeling the cool metal against his skin. It was small, yet it seemed to radiate strength. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to feel a glimmer of peace. The guilt that had weighed on him so heavily began to loosen its grip, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. He realized that his friend's spirit could continue to guide him, not through sorrow, but through the courage and values they had shared. He decided to wear the charm, tucking it under his uniform close to his heart. It became a source of strength during long shifts and dangerous calls, a reminder of the bond that could never be broken, even by death. Each time he felt fear, doubt, or guilt creeping in, he touched the charm and drew on the memory of his friend's bravery and trust. It was a small gesture, but it made a profound difference in his daily life. With this renewed sense of purpose, he began to engage more actively with the team. He shared stories about his teammate, not only about the tragedy but also about the moments of joy, camaraderie, and learning that had defined their time together. He emphasized the importance of teamwork, vigilance, and compassion. The younger firefighters listened intently, inspired not just by the stories of danger, but by the lessons of humanity and resilience woven through them. One day, he was called to lead a training exercise for the new recruits. He demonstrated not only techniques and safety procedures, but also the mindset that allowed firefighters to face danger with courage. He spoke of trust, of looking out for each other, and of the quiet strength that came from knowing that someone had your back. He shared anecdotes about his teammate, highlighting the selflessness and dedication that had inspired him for years. The recruits responded with respect and attentiveness, understanding that these lessons extended beyond firefighting. They were lessons about life. The protagonist also began to make small gestures that honored his friend in everyday life. He checked equipment more diligently, prepared the team for emergencies with extra care, and reminded others of safety protocols, not as a duty, but as a way of carrying forward the legacy of his fallen teammate. Each action, though small, reinforced the values that had defined their bond: courage, responsibility, and loyalty. Outside of work, he began to rebuild his personal life as well. He reached out to friends he had distanced himself from, sharing his experiences and opening up about his grief. The act of speaking, of acknowledging his emotions, helped to lighten the burden he had carried alone. It allowed him to reconnect with the world, to remember that life continued, and that he could honor his friend by living fully and bravely. One evening, he attended a community event honoring first responders. While he initially felt uncomfortable, preferring to remain in the background, he was approached by the family of his fallen teammate. They smiled warmly, and he felt a sense of connection that transcended words. They had included him in the event, not as a reminder of loss, but as a recognition of the bond they all shared. He thanked them, and for the first time, he allowed himself to accept gratitude without the crushing weight of guilt. The experience reinforced his belief that healing did not mean forgetting. It meant embracing the memory of his friend, carrying it with him and allowing it to inspire action rather than sorrow. The charm around his neck became a symbol of this transformation, a tangible reminder of love, courage, and the enduring power of human connection. In the weeks that followed, he found himself taking more initiative at work. He volunteered for challenging calls, not out of recklessness but from a sense of responsibility and purpose. He supported his colleagues, offered guidance to the less experienced, and encouraged open communication about fear, grief, and the emotional toll of their work. His leadership style had changed. It was no longer about proving bravery, but about fostering strength, resilience, and unity within the team. He also made a point to visit the families of those rescued during the fire. He wanted them to know that their loved ones were safe, that their lives mattered, and that the sacrifices made by first responders were grounded in genuine care. These visits brought him a sense of fulfillment, reinforcing the idea that heroism was not measured solely by dramatic acts, but by the quiet, consistent actions that protect, support, and inspire others. The charm, always close to his heart, became a conversation starter as well. Fellow firefighters noticed it and asked about its significance. He shared the story, emphasizing the lessons of loyalty, courage, and selflessness that had defined his friend's life. The item, though small, carried immense meaning, serving as a bridge between past sacrifice and present action. It reminded the team that their work was not only about battling flames, but about embodying values that endured beyond any single moment of danger. Over time, the protagonist's sense of guilt began to transform into gratitude. He was grateful for the friendship he had shared, for the lessons learned, and for the opportunity to carry forward a legacy that mattered. He realized that while he could not undo the past, he could honor it through every choice, every action, and every interaction with those around him. The fire that had once seemed like a moment of insurmountable loss had become a source of insight, empathy, and strength. The firehouse itself began to feel alive again, filled with the sounds of teamwork, laughter, and dedication. The atmosphere was different now, shaped by the memory of what had been lost but enriched by the lessons that loss had taught. The protagonist felt a renewed sense of belonging, understanding that he was part of something larger than himself, a team, a community, and a living tribute to those who had given everything. Late one night, after a particularly long shift, he sat alone in the firehouse kitchen. He held the charm in his hands, feeling the smooth metal and the weight of memory it carried. He whispered words of thanks to his fallen friend, acknowledging the guidance, protection, and inspiration that still shaped his life. For the first time in many months, he felt a sense of peace, a quiet understanding that he was not carrying the burden of survival alone. The gift had given him a path forward, a way to transform grief into purpose and guilt into action. From that day on, the protagonist wore the charm during every call, every training session, and every moment of reflection. It became a symbol of resilience, a connection to the past, and a guide for the future. Through this small but meaningful item, he found a way to live fully, honor his teammate, and embrace the responsibilities of life with courage and humility. The tragedy that had once threatened to define him had become a source of strength. A reminder that even in the face of loss, love, loyalty, and bravery endure, shaping the lives of those left behind in ways both profound and lasting. The morning light filtered through the windows of the firehouse as the protagonist arrived for another day of duty. The smell of coffee mixed with the faint scent of smoke, a familiar and comforting aroma. He carried with him the lessons of the past months and the small charm that had become a symbol of resilience and courage. Today felt different. There was a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long, a feeling that he was finally moving forward while honoring the memory of his fallen teammate. He greeted his colleagues with a nod and a small smile. The team had noticed the changes in him, the renewed energy and the way he approached each task with dedication and thoughtfulness. He was no longer burdened solely by guilt. Instead, he had found a balance between remembering the past and living in the present. Every action, every decision, and every interaction carried the weight of the lessons he had learned from loss and sacrifice. The first call of the day came quickly. A minor fire had broken out in a residential area, and the team responded with precision and efficiency. The protagonist felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, but it was tempered by calm focus. He guided his colleagues, checked equipment, and ensured that every step was executed with care. As they entered the building, he felt the presence of his teammate in the small decisions, the instincts, and the silent reassurances that guided him through every challenge. Inside, the fire was manageable, but it required careful navigation. He noticed the smoke moving unpredictably, the heat fluctuating, and the potential hazards around every corner. He directed the team, assisted residents in exiting safely, and made sure that everyone remained accounted for. Each action was deliberate, measured, and grounded in the experience he had gained, not only from years of training, but from the profound lessons of the past tragedy. After the fire was contained and the residents were safe, the protagonist took a moment to breathe and reflect. The relief on the faces of those he had helped reminded him why he had chosen this life, why courage mattered, and why compassion was as vital as skill. He felt a deep connection to his work and to the people he served, and he realized that living fully and acting bravely were the truest ways to honor those who had given everything. Returning to the firehouse, he began a training session with the younger recruits. He emphasized not only the technical aspects of firefighting, but also the human elements: trust, teamwork, empathy, and resilience. He shared stories of his fallen teammate, highlighting the bravery, loyalty, and kindness that had defined his life. The recruits listened attentively, absorbing not just the facts but the underlying lessons of courage and integrity. Through these sessions, he was able to transform his grief into teaching, ensuring that the values of his friend lived on through others. He also took time to mentor colleagues individually, providing guidance, reassurance, and support. He encouraged open communication, reminding them that fear and grief were natural, but that resilience and courage could emerge from even the darkest moments. He modeled behavior that balanced professionalism with humanity, demonstrating that strength was not only in facing danger but also in acknowledging emotion and learning from experience. Outside of work, the protagonist sought ways to continue healing and giving back. He visited the families of those rescued in past emergencies, offering support, reassurance, and genuine care. He organized community outreach programs teaching fire safety, emergency preparedness, and first aid. These actions, though small, carried profound significance. They reinforced the values that had defined his friendship and professional life and provided tangible ways to honor those who had sacrificed so much. One afternoon, the firehouse received a letter from the family of his fallen teammate. They had been watching his progress, his dedication, and the way he had embraced life while honoring memory. They expressed gratitude, pride, and love, emphasizing that he had carried forward their shared values with integrity and courage. The letter brought tears to his eyes, not of sorrow but of peace. It was a confirmation that his efforts were meaningful and that the legacy of his friend continued through his actions. Inspired by the letter, the protagonist made a personal commitment to continue living and acting with purpose. He wore the charm around his neck every day, a constant reminder of the bond that had shaped him. It was not a symbol of loss alone, but a guide for living fully, acting bravely, and nurturing connections with those around him. The charm became part of his identity, linking the past to the present and serving as a beacon for the future. As months turned into years, he became a respected figure within the firehouse and the community. His guidance shaped the next generation of firefighters, instilling not only skill but also compassion, teamwork, and resilience. He shared stories of bravery and sacrifice, ensuring that every act of courage was remembered and honored. Through mentorship, training, and personal example, he created a culture that valued human connection as much as technical proficiency. He also embraced moments of quiet reflection. Sitting by the window of the firehouse watching the city lights flicker, he often thought of his fallen friend. These moments were not filled with guilt or sadness, but with gratitude and inspiration. He remembered the laughter, the shared experiences, and the courage that had defined their friendship. In those memories, he found guidance, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. The protagonist recognized that life was fragile, that courage and heroism were intertwined with loss, and that surviving tragedy carried responsibility. He embraced every emergency, every training session, and every interaction as an opportunity to live with intention, honor the past, and inspire others. He understood that heroism was not only about dramatic rescues, but also about consistent actions, integrity, and compassion. During one particularly intense fire, he led his team with calm authority, ensuring that all lives were saved and that no one was hurt. As they emerged from the smoke-filled building, he felt a profound connection to the past. He imagined his teammates smiling, silently approving, and proud of the way he had carried forward the values they had shared. That feeling of connection brought comfort, strength, and a renewed sense of purpose. Later, at a community memorial for first responders, he stood quietly, holding the charm in his hand. Families, colleagues, and residents shared stories of courage and sacrifice, and he felt a deep sense of belonging and fulfillment. He realized that the journey through grief had transformed him, that his life was enriched not only by survival but by the lessons of love, loyalty, and bravery that had been entrusted to him. The protagonist continued to live fully, embracing each day with gratitude and courage. He mentored, guided, and inspired others, ensuring that the legacy of his fallen teammate lived on. The small charm around his neck served as a constant reminder of the bond that could never be broken. The sacrifices made and the enduring power of human connection. Through every challenge, every triumph, and every quiet moment, he carried forward the lessons of the past while shaping a future filled with purpose and meaning. He understood that heroism was not defined by a single act, but by the ongoing commitment to live with courage, compassion, and integrity. The fire that had once brought tragedy had become a source of wisdom and strength, guiding him to honor the memory of his friend and to inspire those around him. The story concluded not with an end, but with continuity, a life lived with intention, bravery, and love. The protagonist had transformed grief into strength, guilt into purpose, and memory into action. He remained a hero not only in the eyes of the community, but also in the quiet, daily ways he carried forward the legacy of friendship, sacrifice, and unwavering courage. The journey of healing, remembrance, and heroism continued, shaped by the past but guided by hope, resilience, and the enduring human spirit.